Excellent. Well, Boone, I think we're at 6:10, so everybody, welcome. We are going to go ahead and start our defensible space concepts, our home ignition zones presentation from Boone Zimmerlee. I'm going to let him do his intro, and then we will check back in with you for question and answer at the end of the presentation. So, Boone, take it away, my friend.
Okay. And just like Nathan said, I'm Boone Zimmerlee. I work for Deschutes County as the Fire Adaptive Communities Coordinator. So if you're familiar with Project Wildfire or Fire Free, those are two programs that I administer. I come somewhat assume several folks are familiar with that. And we got the signs up right now for Fire Free, which actually I'll put a plug in now. Starts May 1st. We're going to run for 3 weekends of May at Not Landfill with the 2 weeks in between. And then we'll also be running the transfer sites starting on the 22nd, going through June 5th. And that's all of the days in between. For you guys, one of the sites I think a lot of people are interested in is that West Side site that's out there by the tree farm. That one will be running again this year. So normally that only runs for 1 weekend, but we've got it for 3 weekends, the first 3 weekends of May. And Bend Fire, thanks to both Brooks Resources for allowing us to use that site, and then Bend Fire for going out there and working at that site to help facilitate everybody coming in and out of there. Okay, enough with Fire Free. I'll move on here. So that's not necessarily what you came for tonight. Oh, I was zoomed in a little too far there. Okay, so I'm going to kick this off with a video that just kind of sets the stage of what we're looking at and talking about. And I apologize if you guys have seen this. I use this video quite a bit, so I think a lot of people end up seeing it. Oops. I don't know why that didn't. There we go. Let's turn this. So IBHS is a research lab over in Montana. And they do some pretty cool stuff. They build whole houses, and then they do a lot of testing on how that home ignites, given different kind of situations, whether it's the building materials or the embers being blasted at it or what. So this house here is set up with several different kinds of building materials all the way around it. Right now they're loading up these ember generators. A lot of pretty common landscaping around homes that we see here in Central Oregon. Some, a few plants here and there, lots of bark mulch. Everybody likes using bark mulch to hold down the dust in Central Oregon, it seems. But we get to kind of see how that reacts with our fires here. So 10 to 20 mile an hour winds is what they're generating. And, if we think about our typical fire season or summer months, 10 to 20 mile an hour winds are pretty common, right? That's not something crazy. That's just kind of our standard weather, if you will. But you can see, as we start the video, you can start to see some of those embers and the places that they gather. And those are all the same places that we look at for needles and leaves and debris gathering as well. And if we have leaves and needles and debris gathering there, then, we're essentially creating a receptive fuel bed for any kind of embers that may come in the event of a wildfire. And then if you're wondering what pine straw is, that's just needles, pine needles. It's a term used more often on the East Coast than the West Coast, for sure. But yeah, we begin to see kind of some of those materials, how they're standing up. We see the fire on the roof in the valley, where all the needles generally collect, the gutters that are beginning to melt and fall off. And that bark mulch down below, burning pretty good, beginning to ignite. Quite a bit of fire, right? It's kind of swirling around there in the corner of our houses, or of the house. And then they do have, just as it says, there are different types of building materials. So we kind of get to see the effects of that, right? Of what those building materials do. And they've got some other videos on the website that really show this well, but you can see the vinyl beginning to melt, fall off, and exposing the wood underneath. And then while the cement board on the other side is, for the most part, not really being impacted, still holding together quite well. Gable vents, right? This is 1/8-inch screening that they have on this, which is what we recommend right now. What we recommend for embers, most buildings are made with 1/4-inch screening. So quite a bit bigger embers can come through a 1/4-inch screen than a 1/8-inch screen. So whatever we can get. This part of the video, I always, I think about pretty much myself, but almost anyone who lives in Central Oregon, right? We, not a lot of houses have air conditioning. Some do, some don't. It's kind of a matter of preference, but I don't on mine. I often leave that window open, and then often when I leave for work, I forget about the window and don't end up closing it. So I see that video and I watch it and I think, man, that was pretty quick for that house to become consumed. I think that whole thing was 4 minutes, and most of that, for the most part, that was real time from when they started blasting the embers until it was engulfed in flames there. But if you leave a window open and fire is able to enter into your home, I mean, 4 minutes, the fire department probably doesn't even know that the house is on fire, let alone yourself. I mean, you might still be, you'd be, well, who knows what you're up to, but you're definitely not getting a word, or no one's probably telling you that the house is on fire yet. Okay, so that video, a little bit, when I show that, I'm afraid that it makes people like I'm doing some kind of fear mongering, and I'm not trying to do that at all, right? What I want to show is that we have embers, and the embers light different places around the home, and we can think about how that home is connected to the wildland fire, and then we also want to think about where those embers land. And I guess we want to preface that whole thing that the number one cause of home ignition is not that wall of flames. It's ember fallout from the approaching fire. So that's kind of where we're at and what we're going to be thinking about as we kind of navigate through this talk tonight. So how did we get here, right? And there's a little bit of backstory, or how did we get to the point where we're talking about defensible space so much, right? So in 1997, or 96, I should say, we had the skeleton fire. And out of that, that fire was significant, not just for Deschutes County and the Bend area, but it was also significant for the whole state, where we ended up coming out with the Senate Bill 360, which, we can dive in. I don't really want to dive into Senate Bill 360, but 360, the big thing that really came out of it was that we were beginning to recognize that everybody had a role in fire. And we also were able to kind of define some of those terms and think about defensible space and how we should be approaching it and looking at it. So there was a lot to Senate Bill 360 that really began to pave the way for us to even have discussions, right? And just like I said, when we think about fire on the landscape being big or whatever, but we think about the big picture of fire out there and what's going on, everybody's got their role, right? Forest Service is out there doing, treatment in the forest. They're doing their prescribed burns and kind of working towards a healthy forest and reducing the intensity of our fires. State lands or state offices are working with landowners to help them manage some of their lands as well. And then we slowly get all the way down to the individual resident, and that's where it comes into our part of things, right? It's what do we do around our home to kind of set the stage and help out to do our piece in preparing for wildfire. And somebody asked this the other day, and I kind of wanted to illustrate, and I think this is the right point to illustrate it, or to kind of have us thinking about it. As everybody's doing their piece, we've got firefighters out there that are fighting fire as fires are happening in the wildland and trying to cut that off, right? And what we don't want to end up having is a fire approaching into a neighborhood, firefighters having to go into the neighborhood and do work on your home versus doing work on the fire and stopping it before it gets to the neighborhood, right? So we want to recognize that we have kind of that requirement, or that piece of the puzzle is ours, right? We should be thinking about that as far as our responsibility. What are we doing to kind of help put that piece of puzzle together. Because after all, if the firefighter comes into a neighborhood and you're thinking about sizing up homes and you're putting resources there like hand crews and engines, those are all resources that are now working on the house, prepping it before the fire gets there versus actually being on the fire line and putting it out before it gets there. So we want to do our piece. So Central Oregon, Deschutes County, no stranger to fire, right? This map here, it's a little bit tough to see, but when we look at this bar chart up here, it goes back for the last century to 1900 all the way up to 2010. And those bars are the number of acres that are burned. And what we see is we have this large one here in 1910. 1910 was a big year. Lots of fires happened across the western states, including Oregon and Washington and Deschutes County. And this graph could be generated pretty much anywhere in the western states. They all look very similar to one another. But right after 1910, we'd see a significant decrease in the number of acres burned. And we continue to see that number of acres burned staying relatively small. And then as we get into these last few decades, we see those numbers of acres increase again. And what the driving force right behind that is, especially in Central Oregon, is our forests before, so pre-European settlement, before you can even see this graph, we would have had lots of acres burned out here, but they would have been low intensity fires that reoccurred quite often. So they would have been on a 5 to 35 fire return interval. So they would be out there on the landscape burning the same acre of ground every 5 to 35 years, depending on how the situations align. But we've been suppressing fire, which has led to large accumulations of fuel in our forest. And then when we go out there to fight those fires, oftentimes those fires are quite intense, and we're unable to manage them in the way that we were, in the previous decades. So we end up with large fires that are pretty costly and can be quite destructive at times. There's a few things to look at in this map. These large polygons of large shapes of these fires throughout the county, those are fires those are the large fires over 100 acres in the county that are mapped that we can see, and that's 100 years of data. But if we were to zoom in on this map, you can see all these little black specks all over the place. And those are fires under 10 acres, but it's not fires under 10 acres for 100 years. That's just a 10-year data set to show how many ignition sources we have. It's not that fires are going away or ignition sources are going away. We still have lightning on the landscape. So it's just, so fire, what I'm trying to get at is fire's here to stay. It's not something that exclusion is not really an option. It's something that's going to happen, and we need to be prepared for it. So thinking about fire and how it burns out there, there's two triangles that we look at as firefighters. And on the left side is the oxygen, heat, fuel. So to have any kind of combustion, you have to have those three things to have combustion. And then on the wildland side, we're always wanting to watch to see how that fire is behaving, how intense it's burning, how big are the flames, that kind of thing. And the three inputs for that is the weather, topography, and fuel. And then when you look at those two triangles, the one thing that they have in common is the fuel. So that's kind of where we want to focus. We're not going to get rid of all the fuel, but we may be able to alter that fuel to such that we're able to alter the behavior of those fires. So like I said, we think about fires, and we remember as we were going through this that the number one cause of fires or of home ignitions is embers, right? And those embers are coming from trees and vegetation that's burning. And it's pretty easy for anyone to look at this picture, here, and you can see the fuel loading, right? You can see all the vegetation that's going to be fuel for the fire. You can see the brush there. You can see the branches all the way to the ground. It's pretty easy to imagine what a fire would do. If it burned through that, the trees would be torching and be throwing embers, and be casting embers ahead of itself. The hard part is when we turn around and we look at our own house, right? When we look at this picture right here from the firefighter's eye, he sees fuel loading. he or she sees fuel loading across all of this in the front where they see all the brush. Then you see ladder fuels, and we're going to define ladder fuels. And then we see fuels beneath other trees that would allow for these trees to torch and cast embers. We also see receptive fuel beds, big beds of needles where embers, or this looks like it might be needles and bark mulch, but needles and or bark mulch next to the house where embers could land. And then we see that it's a continuous path. Fuel is right up to the deck, which is just a heavier fuel, larger piece of fuel, and then it's the whole home would easily ignite. So a little bit harder for us to look at it, but we need to think about our home as well. How does it line up or compare to the wildland for fuels? So what we want, right, is if we're thinking about the fire in the wildland and as it's moving across the landscape, that fire is out there doing its thing. It's torching trees, throwing embers out ahead of itself, starting new spot fires. So new little fires are emerging in front of the main flanking fire as it's moving. And it's starting new fires, and those are growing together and they're torching trees and going. But what we want to have happen is as that fire approaches our houses or our structures or where we live, we want the fire to decrease the amount of trees that it's torching. We want to eliminate the potential for it to torch. And then we want it, so then we're keeping that fire closer to the ground. And then we want to think about the brush and the fuels around that as far as continuous paths. We want to decrease that, use a lot of fire resistant plants. And then by the time the fire gets to the house, we want to see that fire go out and be fully disconnected from the wildland. So ultimately you would end up in some kind of a scene like this where there may be torched trees out in the wildland, but as it came to your house, a lot of those are still standing because you've done the work to take care of that stuff. And so these are the three zones that we think in terms of. It's that 0 to 5 feet, 5 feet to 30 feet, and 30 feet out to 100 feet. All of the data, all the research that we've done, the IVHS, all those folks, Jack Cohen, there was a quote from earlier, there's 30 years of research behind all this stuff that basically tells us that no matter what is outside of us or what the fire is behaving outside of this 100 feet, it's the last 100 feet from that fire to your house that has the greatest impact on whether or not your home will survive. So we first need to be turning around, looking at our own place, thinking about those three zones and make sure that we have those all in place before we're going out beyond that to worry about our home igniting. So we're going to go through an assessment, and we're going to keep kind of that, those thoughts in our mind, right? Those three zones. And we're going to do this assessment kind of running through the house, starting at the house or with the house itself on the roof and working down and then going out to the immediate area, and then what the fuels look like and how we should be thinking about our fuels. So the roof, just like it says, most vulnerable place, right? It's going to be catching a lot of embers. So we're always, you want to make sure that we're keeping that clean. We don't have a bunch of needles up there. We're not gathering stuff in the gutters or the valleys that are on our roofs. We want to have a Class A roofing material, which most people today have Class A. It wasn't that long ago that there was a lot of places here in Deschutes County that there was shingle roofs, and you can put a treatment on those, but it also requires you to do it every year, which is going to be fairly expensive, and most people are not likely to do that. But either way, Class A roofing is what we want on our roofs to protect them, and then also we want to make sure we're doing our yearly maintenance of cleaning them up. And then we're going to be looking at the siding and the windows, thinking about the windows. Are they dual pane windows? Are they made of tempered glass? What kind of screening do we have in them? And then what is the siding? Is it something like this that's wood that's going to be requiring a treatment every year? Or is it something that's a cement board that's going to be really durable against reflecting the heat away from our home, that's going to be less likely to ignite? And then the immediate area around our home. So thinking about that 0 to 5. So within that 0 to 5, you should have a non-combustible zone around your home. So if you have a deck or a fence, for the most part, that's considered and it's attached to your house, then it's considered part of the structure, right? Because that's if it catches on fire, it's very likely it's going to be catching your home on fire as well. I don't remember if I zoom into that one. I do not. Okay. But in these two pictures, right, at the one on the kind of the right, kind of always makes me chuckle. When I first saw this, it was well before I thought I'd be teaching any classes and using this photo, but it made me chuckle that somebody loved that log quite a bit, so they built their deck right over it. And then when you look at it from the firefighter, because that's who I was at the time, I did a lot of that. I thought, man, it just looks like a big wick sticking out from the bottom of the deck, waiting to ignite somebody's house. But on this bottom picture, kind of on the converse side of things, these people have taken the step to detach their fence from their home by using a metal gate and separating their fence from it. And going back to this picture here, thinking we're looking at that 0 to 5 feet, right? This picture has quite a few things to think about in it, but one is this hedge of arborvitae. Not only is it a bush right up next to your house, but it's probably one of the most flammable bushes around. It's a arborvitae or a low-growing juniper tam. They have several different names that people call them, but they're quite dry. It's green on the outside. They don't take much water, so they stay pretty moist through the summer months. They stay pretty dry through the summer months and pretty much year round. But they're very, very dry. If you were to pull those needles back, you would see all that dry material just barely beneath the surface. And then it's also got a deck that's pretty low to the ground. Likely there's some maintenance to be done around that as well. So that 0 to 5 could use some work on that one. And what we really want to see is something like this, where we've taken advantage of some of the different rocks around or whatever it might be that's non-combustible, and we've created that 5-foot zone around our house where nothing is connected to our house, right? And remember, if you're thinking about the fire and the wildland, it's dropped to the ground, it's creeping through stuff here and there, but when it gets that last 0 to 5 feet, it's fully disconnected from your house. It's another good example of what somebody did. They built a little barrier. I thought it looked pretty cool, but yeah, it's crushed rock all the way around it. So trees, we have a lot of questions about trees over this last year, especially given the fires last summer, because I think people drive the highway and they see lots of large trees that have torched out or burned up, and they want to make sure they're doing the right thing at home. And in Central Oregon, right, this would be what we would see on the landscape if we weren't out there suppressing fires all the time or trying to keep them out of the ecosystem, if you will. If we weren't trying to exclude them, most of our stands would look similar to this, where we'd have large trees, hardly any low growing branches. There's a few bushes here and there that are growing out on rock outcrops where fire doesn't easily access them, and a lot of grass understory. So not a lot of ladder fuels in that last picture. And the ladder fuels are just that. They're the ladder that the fire climbs to torch those trees. And remember, we don't want them torching for a couple of reasons, but one of them is because we don't want those trees to torch and cast embers onto our homes. And of course, we don't want giant flames next to our house, but embers are our number one concern, right? But ladder fuels are low growing branches in the brush that may be, or any vegetation that's growing directly underneath our trees that allow flames to climb into the trees and torch them. So people will ask me, and this picture I thought kind of illustrated it well. You see a tree in your yard and you're like, well, that tree is so close to my house, it's got to be a fire hazard. But it's a massive tree, right? There's a lot there. But the reality is that there's not really any way for a fire to climb into this tree. And the thing that they do have that is a hazard is all this brush out here that they've allowed to grow in. This is going to be a pretty intense fire. And maybe because of the brush growing in, there is the potential of it torching one of these two trees. But it's not that the tree is the hazard, it's that the brush is grown in and it needs to be reduced. The tree is definitely big and it's massive, but it's not half the hazard that all the vegetation there, the brush is. Another picture kind of depicting that, right? A tree like this has often been asked, this tree is close to my house, I want it out of here, it's a fire hazard. And the truth is, right behind them, the bark mulch is right around the edge of their house. And this bush here is a much, much greater hazard than having a large tree here. Right? And large trees have their benefits to have around your home. Right? So if you have large trees, it's going to do a couple of things for you. Right? You don't want it, for the most part, interacting with your chimney or rubbing on your roof and tearing up the shingles or anything like that. And it does come with some needles that fall into your gutters and need to be cleaned out. But the tree is going to do two things for a wildland fire for you. And one is it's going to be a bit of a screening for catching embers so they don't land onto your house. It would be very hard pressed to get a tree to ignite from an ember unless it was hollowed out and rotted in the inside or something like that. But a green tree like this one living, ember's going to land on it, it's going to go right out. So it's going to catch embers. And then the other part, quite literally, when we're calculating probability of ignition out on the landscape on a fire, one of the inputs to that is, are the fuels shaded or not? And a large tree is going to be shading your home, decreasing your probability of ignition. So it's providing shade on your home and a bit of screening from embers. And this was just another picture of large trees are there, and the real threat is coming from the small trees that are growing in underneath, and the brush is coming in that's slowly going to become ladder fuels. Let's see, double check my time here. I think I'm about running out. Surface vegetation. So we want to think about how that's arranged out there in your 3 zones. We want to make sure that we're breaking up that continuity all the way out to the 100-foot zone. When we think about that 0 to 5, that's the non-combustible zone. That 5 to 30 is the zone that we should only have, that should be landscaped. We should know all of the plants that are out there, and they should be fire-resistant plants that are in that zone. And then that 30 to 100, we want to make sure we're breaking up the continuity, we're selecting the right plants. And then people will ask, what are the plants that I select? And I thought this was a good picture to kind of get people thinking about it. It's hard to see, but there's a tree, there's a house in that in the distance there. And then directly behind me when I took this picture was another house. And the owners actually asked me, where should we start? I said, well, the place to start would be to get rid of some of this arborvitae, get rid of the stuff that's not fire resistant, get it out of there. And then once you get that out, then you can begin to look at the ladder fuels. What kind of fuels do you have beneath some of these larger trees? Identify the ones that you want to keep, and then begin to break that up so you don't have that continuity or that big pocket of fuel that's going to be really hot when it does burn. Most people are pretty good on this nowadays, but your firewood, lumber piles, any heat sources that are going to be a sustained heat source should be 30 feet away, because this will ignite your home if it's within 30 feet and it's a large enough heat source that sits there drying out your structure. Driveways, right? We want to make sure those things stay clear, not just for firefighters, but also for any EMS, any emergency vehicles that may be coming in, such as ambulances and stuff. So I ran through that a little bit fast, but I think we're sticking on time here. But we just went through a full assessment, right? We went from the roof, the siding, the immediate areas around your home, around your structure, talked about some of the trees, the benefits of having some of them, and things to think about to make sure they do survive, and when you need to be thinking about getting rid of them if they're contributing to ladder fuels or not. Same with surface vegetation, removing those ladder fuels, breaking up continuity so there's not a continuous path for fire to spread through. And then we talked about some of the flammable material like wood piles, and then also your driveway and how to keep that clean. So I kind of wanted to go through a couple of the resources that are out there and just kind of hit on them while we're here and while I have you guys here. But FireWise USA, I think several communities on this call right now are part of the FireWise recognition program. And we just put together this story map recently. If you're curious of it and you'd like to check it out, I would go to this website. I was thinking I might be able to put it into the chat. Now, this is a much bigger email address, but there it is in the chat too. If you guys wanted to check that out, you can open it in a browser and look at it after the meeting or whatever. But it'll walk you through kind of the benefits of FireWise, all the communities that are here in Central Oregon, in Deschutes County that are FireWise. what it means, what the steps are, and then there's also some resources there. There's a few take-home things. If you're wanting to go down that road, there's a nice checklist to walk you through becoming FireWise. Whoops. There we go. Okay. And right now, this is our list of who's FireWise in Deschutes County. It's growing all the time, right? 43 communities. And I guess I will say this couple of things about FireWise and the benefits. One is, building that network of folks through the community. It helps you bond with your neighbors quite a bit more. You kind of get aligned with priorities out there, but also it gives you a framework so that when you do start working, it gives you the framework to actually figure out what are your priorities. So you have access to folks like myself, the fire department, other people come, Oregon Department of Forestry, that come out, talk about some of the themes that we see in the neighborhood, and then help to kind of build that structure of getting work done. And then along with that, there is, it isn't always a guaranteed, but oftentimes, over the last few years, I've seen Deschutes County, and I think Oregon Department of Forestry as well, have had funds that are grant funding that's been specifically aimed at FireWise recognized communities. And I think we had one last year, and it was not just FireWise recognized, but also those that want to become FireWise recognized. And, in the plan, the hope is that we're able to help people, help facilitate people in becoming recognized. Lots of other resources out here. We all try to work together, right? Project Wildfire, which essentially is myself, fire free events we talked about earlier, the firewise.org. I didn't talk much about Central Oregon Fire website, but that is something out there if you're want to know where prescribed burns are happening. There's maps there. There's a text that you can sign up for to get notifications when there are burns. And then, of course, the local fire department, which is Bend Fire for you guys. Bend Fire is a great resource. They do a lot of one-off home assessments, talk with community members, and of course, I partner with them whenever we do our FireWise tours around, if it's within the city of Bend. Okay, Nathan, I feel like I ran quite a bit there towards the end, but if there are questions, I think we can open some of that up.
No, that's perfect. And Boone, super appreciate that. That's fantastic information. Everybody, thanks for attending. But yeah, we'll take some questions now at this point. Let me make sure. Let me get my gallery. There we go. Put our gallery on. Those of you that are joining us just for the presentation, if you haven't done the webinar before, down at the bottom of your screen, there's a little button that says Q&A. For most of you, it should be right next to your participants button. Just click that Q&A button and you can write a question into us and I will moderate. And again, a lot of times questions come up after you've heard one of these presentations, you take a look at your property and you're like, oh, I wish I would have asked Boone that. So again, make sure you utilize his email address. Those of you joining from Century West Neighborhood Association, you could also email us as well, and we can definitely get that information to Boone. So we will let your questions come in and we'll get the first one. Oh, great question, Maria. Thank you so much. So first off, Boone, she says, thank you. What do you think of metal roofs?
I just have to say, Nathan, you're a pretty good moderator. It sounds like I'm on a radio show. Metal roofs, right? Metal roofs will, for the most part, they're going to hit that Class A. So, and that's the standard that we want to look at, or what we want to get to. So the Class A roofing can be just about anything. And, and it kind of depends on where you live, whether going to metal roof is really buying you much more than over the top of a composition roof that also meets the Class A requirements. And it really does depend. I would have to say metal roofs are a little easier to get cleaned off because usually the needles slide right off of it. So if that's something that you're battling with, I think that you're probably going to get some benefits out of it there. I don't know if there's a huge benefit of it not burning versus just a regular Class A if you're keeping a regular composition, if you're keeping it clean.
Perfect. Thank you. Next one. Where can we find a list of fire-resistant plants? That's a good question.
I will give you that right now.
And I will say, as Boone's getting that, Amy Jo is doing that presentation for those of you that do not or did not see this
Yeah.
in the tickets, you can actually watch all 3 of the presentations tonight after the event. So we're going to be doing an email to everybody that registered tonight, and you'll be able to actually watch Amy Jo's presentation. But in the meantime, Boone can answer that.
Yeah, there we go. Copy, and then I'll put this. Should I put it in the chat or into the Q&A?
You can go ahead and just put it in the chat. It's probably easier because then folks can pull it directly out of chat.
Okay.
And folks, again, if you don't have that open, there's a chat button right there at the bottom of your screen. You can just hit that button and you'll see everything Boone is typing to the right.
Yeah, and yep, it's firefree.org. I have it linked there on my website. So firefree.org has it, and then you'll see right on the top there's going to be a fire resistant plants, and that'll take you to the guide. There's a little bit of a discussion about them, and then there's a link to the guide itself that's a PDF that you can download. And then I believe that there's also there is an update coming to it that Amy Jo I think is talking about. And once that's update happens, I'll also link that to that website. So the Fire Free website should be good on that all the time. And I can see these questions here. Nathan, I can read them if you want.
Oh, go for it. Yeah, go for
it. So there's a question here. How do we deal with the city and neighborhood CCNRs that discourage the removal to help with our defensible space? Can the code be changed to allow that? CCNRs that discourage tree removal. I should quantify that, right? So tree removal is a bit of a tricky one. So a lot of those slides that I was showing, once we get into a larger tree, especially if it's ponderosa pine, which is our dominant species here in Central Oregon, it begins to lose its limbs all on its own and becomes, it does self-pruning. So it loses all of its ladder fuel. So if we're keeping it clean underneath, or if it's on your lawn, it's not generally a threat. When it is a threat is when it's that smaller diameter and it's beneath larger trees and there's a bunch of small ones that are growing in. Then we need to be thinking about those being removed. And I think the CCNR part of that is also make sure that we're able to remove our brush, right? Because that's the brush and the very small diameter are far and beyond more of a threat to our home than a large ponderosa pine out in our yard. So to get that stuff, so think about CCNRs and the changes on the Project Wildfire webpage under resources tab. There's some example communities that have changed their CCNRs in the past. I wasn't in this position at that time, but it's something to take a look at that may be able to help you out. Is Trex deck a good alternative for fire prevention or similar deck materials? So yeah, so if it's a wooden deck, it requires that yearly maintenance of being treated to keep it from igniting. In Trex decking, I was just talking with a gentleman from Redmond Fire actually the other day about the decking materials. And so Trex, right, I think if you look it up and look at the specs of the different types and then also the research papers on the ignitability of it, Trex decking doesn't light real easy, but once it does get going, it burns hot. But I think the big key is you don't want it to light from the beginning. So Trex deck definitely offers that for you. What do you think of placing 1/8 inch metal screen or over existing 1/4 inch metal screen if I can't remove the 1/4 inch screen? Yeah, that's a good question. That is kind of the common practice actually, is to put that 1/8 inch right over the top of the 1/4 inch. There's a couple different, it depends on what one you're looking at, but when it's those eaves, you want that 1/8 inch up there, and putting it over the 1/4 inch is going to be just fine. Same with the blocking vents that go along the edges of our houses as well.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So yeah, folks, continue submitting questions if you want. Lisa, actually, did you have, oh, there we go. Go ahead. Boone, I'll let you take that one. Best window screen material.
Best window screen. Oh, yeah, it's going to be that metal. I think is it aluminum or the stainless steel, but most of them don't come with that. So I don't know what you do. I think you might have to. I don't know if you have to make those yourself or order them. I'm sure somebody makes them for you. But I think in that video, right? I think what we're trying to get at is just make sure you close your windows, because the screen's going to be on that outside. And it may melt right off and kind of flash over and be gone. And it's going to be, important to have that dual pane tempered glass stuff, which actually, I believe the building codes now, because of energy efficiency, all new structures have that dual pane tempered glass in them now. Unless it's an older construction. I see, Lisa, you put some links into the chat here. I've never gone to it, but it looks like you probably, I guess you have some nice ones there. Yeah. Oh, another question. I have 2 super large brush piles on my property that are at one point I thought I would burn, but now I want to chip it so I can incorporate into my sandy soil along the manure, in effect to amend the soil quality and water retention. This is a bad idea. Wood chips are incorporated into soil. Can fire travel through the soil? The fire can travel through the soil, and I think it goes back to that 0 to 5 feet. And I don't feel, what you're doing is something I do around my house as well. I often actually rototill it into my garden, and I just rototilled a bunch into a new spot of grass that I'm putting in, but it can travel. So you still just want to think about that 0 to 5 feet. What are you keeping in that 0 to 5 to disconnect your home from the wildland? That should be the place that you don't mulch it in or you don't stir it in too much. And if you're putting enough soil in there, I'm sure that it's going to break down fairly quickly, and it's not going to burn readily through that stuff. A fire that moves through the ground, we call it a ground fire. But those ground fires, opposed to a surface fire, they're actually technical terms that are actually defined, which sounds silly. But either way, ground fire moves through the ground, and it's usually connecting roots or whatever. But that stuff moves very slow, like over the course of days to move a few feet. So if your home is impacted by a fire, you're likely to have firefighters go through there and take a look at it, but you should still be thinking about that 0 to 5 and making sure that you've created that disconnect between the wildland and your home.
Hey, Nathan and Boone. So I participated in the FireWise committee for Broken Top over the last several years. And one of the things that we did is I think we worked with the FireWise people, and maybe they gave us a draft of a property evaluation form. And I think for Broken Top, we kind of made that our own and made it our own document, but I reworked that document and I've put it out on the CWNA website if anybody's interested. And I'm putting the link in the chat right now. You will find some other links out on the CWNA website for references that Boone has made, and we'll just continue to build that out. The big issue is there is so much information out there. There are so many videos. There are so many wonderful materials. It's hard to figure out which one is the one that we want to push out and which ones do we want to focus on. So we'll continue to add to our webpage and add more resources as we come across those. But hopefully some people will find that property evaluation form of use. It helps you prioritize. It just helps you do a walkthrough, and it looks at bushes, it looks at trees, it looks at what's going on with your chimneys and how much debris do you have around your chimneys, etc. Just gives you a really good, what we found actually is you can do a property evaluation in about 20 minutes. Doesn't take long to fill out this evaluation form. And I revised the form so that you can prioritize your workload. And there's a column, and maybe what you do is you put a 1, 2, 3 or an ABC so that you can break it into chunks, because it's hard to get it all done in a weekend. Just depending on your property. I had a piece of property, and I kid you not, every year, 40 to 50 bags of pine needles every fire-free season. So that's a lot of work.
Yeah, and Lisa, just to add to what you're just saying there, the Broken Top, you guys have done quite the job in building that assessment. And last year, I hesitate to say I wrote, but I put together a 2-part blog discussing that process. So if you're curious, if you're out there and you're curious of what the process is, that blog kind of walks you through what they do, and then also kind of sets up a bit of a timeline of how that would work. I believe there's, again, links to, I think it's Lisa's assessment there. So yeah,
Great.
a real nice program. I thought that was pretty cool. I thought it was worth sharing. So I tried to share it out through projectwildfire.org. That's where it's at.
Yep, that's terrific. And then Wildfire Wednesdays. Nathan, do you want to promote that? Or Boone, do you want to talk about Wildfire Wednesdays and the various programs that are out there?
The OSU, OSU has a series that they're doing right now, and it is Wildfire Wednesdays. They're also calling it Fire Aware, Fire Prepared. So every Wednesday they're putting on a 1 hour talk between noon and 1. And let's see, Nathan, you might have the link to that, or I don't think I have it anymore. Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah. Let me pull it up real quick.
Okay. And that's a great one. That's been kind of fun to listen to and kind of watch. They've been facilitating getting some different folks across all of the state. So, and it is, keep in mind when you listen to different talks, different parts of the states have kind of different fire cycles. You may hear something that doesn't totally align, but the basic principles of defensible space around your home is the same no matter where you live.
And there you go. So I just put it in there for you through OSU Extension Services. So again, great work that they do. Again, another very collaborative effort. Again, all these things are super collaborative. I think that's what's so fun about being a part of them.
I think one of the most helpful ones, it was around a go bag. And let's see, the link to that kit, that go bag kit, so this is something that you'd want to have on hand just in case you reach the, ready, set, go. So if you reach a level 3 evacuation where you are supposed to leave immediately, this is a wonderful exercise. Can you leave the house in 5 minutes? Do you have a go bag that gets you out of the house in 5 minutes? So this link takes you to a kit to give you some ideas on how to prepare so you can do something like that.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, for that. That's a great prompt, right? After last year, there's been a plenty of phone calls and inquiries about escape routes and evacuation routes for driving out of a community. And, I don't want anyone to take this wrong, but right before we think about where we're driving out, first we need to think about, are we actually prepared to drive out? Because believe me, the roads and all of that stuff, everybody's talking, it's all coordinated. There's a plan out there for you as far as getting out, and likely it's going to be the same routes you drive every day to come in and out of your community, just because we want to lessen all the confusion. But first thing you need to do is think about having your go kit ready, having things prepared. And there's quite a few resources on that web page there, and I can't take credit for that. Most all that stuff was built well before me. So right, I'm just working off of off all the work that people have done over the last few decades, really. So there's another question in the Q&A. Do you know anything about how to get permission to thin trees and clean brush on an undeveloped lot of land bordering my property? No, I don't have a whole lot. I can tell you a couple of things, right? It's always tough. There's carrots and sticks out there. That's where I like to start at. It's carrots and sticks. And oftentimes, people see that next to them, they want to get the stick out. They want to go and find somebody for not doing something. And oftentimes those people don't even own the property, or don't even live in the area, but they own the property, don't know what it looks like, don't know that they live in a fire environment. And so education is piece of that. But social science tells us that just because we educate somebody doesn't mean that they're going to go and do it. Doesn't mean that they're going to listen to it or understand it or have a working knowledge of what we just told them. What really gets people to do stuff is seeing that their neighbors are doing it, right? So if you've done all those things around your home, pretty soon those people that come by their property, they're going to look at it and be like, oh man, everyone else has cleaned it up. I haven't even done mine yet. And they're going to feel a little embarrassed. And you're going to start getting them done. And, I've been working with a community that's, they don't have an HOA or any organization, and we're trying to build them a network so they can begin to reach out. And that's one of the things we're talking about with them is you just got to start doing the work so that your neighbors see it. And it's all about getting a big ball to roll, right? We're just trying to get that ball rolling. So it's a pretty heavy lift to start off with at times, but definitely have seen it through Central Oregon that it kind of creeps up on you before you know it. Everybody's doing it. You didn't even realize that they were all pulling along with you.
Yeah, yeah, those are all great points. I think just from a practical standpoint, you've got to find out who owns the piece of property,
Yeah.
and you can find their name and their mailing address. So if they don't have a house on that lot, you can still get to their mailing address, and you can look that information up and dial. And so you can reach out to them by mail. If you are living in a community that has an HOA, I still encourage you to reach out to the HOA to say, hey, I'd like to get in touch with this neighbor to talk about some fire mitigation, but do it in a nice way. Start there. And don't sick the HOA on them. Like Boone's saying, carrot and sticks. So
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. That's great info. That's right, everybody. And I guess that's more of what maybe her question is more practical, but it is the shoot style gets you right to them.
yeah. And sometimes your neighborhood association can help you too. So consider them a resource if you can't find the information on Dial or you don't have an HOA. Maybe that person who owns the lot, maybe they're a member of the neighborhood association. So we might have their contact info too. So just a few ideas. Do we have more Q&A?
I think that's pretty much all of it. So again, great questions, everybody. Yeah, I think we're probably pretty good. So I guess Boone, really appreciate it. I know you probably give this talk a couple hundred times a year, but I think every time we hear it, and now that you're videotaped and going to be on the CWNA YouTube channel for folks to continue to be reminded about this stuff, that'll be great. So I just appreciate your time tonight. And again, if folks rewatch the video, Boone's contact information is up there if you have any questions, or you can contact the neighborhood association. So again, just want to say thank you very much for your time tonight, man.
Yeah, no problem. You guys are welcome.
And Lisa just put in there, Fire Free Weekends, May 1st through the 15th. Take advantage of that great opportunity. All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks.